It all started with something so small that I almost ignored it. One morning, as I climbed into my truck to head to work, I noticed the fuel gauge was lower than it should have been. I could have sworn I filled up just a few days ago. Maybe I'd forgotten about running errands over the weekend, or maybe the tank had sprung a leak. I shook my head, telling myself not to overthink it. Trucks are old machines. They act up sometimes. So I drove to the gas station, filled the tank, and moved on with my day. But then it happened again, and again. Each time, the needle on the gauge crept closer to empty faster than it logically should have. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things or misremembering how much gas I'd put in. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My truck wasn't leaking. I checked for that. There were no puddles under it in the driveway, no smell of gasoline lingering in the air. Something else was going on. The breaking point came one night after dinner. Mark and I were sitting on the couch watching TV when I glanced out the window and froze. There, under the dim glow of the streetlight, was a figure crouched by my truck. They moved quickly, their silhouette hunched over the side of the vehicle near the gas tank. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture before they could disappear into the shadows. For a moment, I debated whether to go outside and confront them. But what if they ran? Or worse, what if they got aggressive? Instead, I stayed hidden behind the curtain and watched as they hurried away, disappearing into the darkness. It wasn't until later, when I zoomed in on the grainy image, that I saw her face clearly for the first time. It was Karen from across the street. Karen had always struck me as peculiar. She lived alone in the house directly opposite ours, a sprawling ranch-style home surrounded by an immaculate garden. Her lawn was so perfectly manicured it looked artificial, and her mailbox gleamed like it had been polished daily. She was also the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA rules, constantly patrolling the neighborhood for infractions. If anyone dared leave a trash can out past collection day or hang Christmas lights too early, Karen would be there to remind them, in writing. But siphoning gas, that seemed extreme, even for her. What did she need with my fuel? Did she think I wouldn't notice? Or worse, was this some twisted form of retaliation because of our ongoing clashes with the HOA? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't just annoying. It felt personal. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I decided to play detective. Over the next week, I kept a close eye on my truck. Every evening, I parked it in the driveway and left it unlocked. A risky move, but necessary. Then I waited. Sure enough, Karen struck again. This time, I watched from behind the curtains as she approached my truck with a hose slung over her shoulder. She moved confidently, like someone who'd done this countless times before. As she bent down to attach the hose to the gas tank, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How dare she invade my property like this? And why? That's when I realized, if Karen wanted to steal my gas, fine. But she was going to regret it. Karen wasn't just some random person in the neighborhood. She was a force to be reckoned with. Everyone knew who she was, even if they didn't want to admit it. She had lived on Evergreen Lane for as long as anyone could remember, and her house stood out not because of its size or beauty, but because of how obsessively maintained it was. The grass looked like it had been measured and trimmed to the millimeter. The flower beds were arranged with military precision, and her driveway gleamed so brightly that you could practically see your reflection in it. But Karen wasn't just about perfection. She took immense pride in being the self-appointed guardian of the HOA rules. If someone painted their front door a shade darker than allowed, Karen would march over with a clipboard and a stern expression. If holiday decorations stayed up past the deadline, she'd leave anonymous notes taped to mailboxes, and heaven forbid if someone parked a car on their lawn, even briefly. Karen would report them faster than you could say emergency meeting. So when I realized that she was the one sneaking around my truck at night, stealing gas, I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why me? Was this some kind of twisted punishment for pushing back against the HOA's endless rules? Or was there something else going on? I decided to keep quiet about what I'd seen. Confronting her directly felt risky. What if she denied everything? Worse, what if she tried to turn the tables and accuse me of something? No, I needed proof. And more importantly, I needed to make sure she learned her lesson without escalating things further. That's when I came up with an idea. Over the next few days, I kept a close watch on my truck. Every evening, I parked it in the same spot in the driveway and left it unlocked, making it easy for her to strike again. But this time, I was ready. During the day, I visited the hardware store and picked up a few supplies. A small container, some brightly colored food dye, and a clever little valve attachment. By the time I finished setting everything up, my trap was good to go. The plan was simple. Anyone trying to siphon gas from my truck wouldn't get fuel. They'd get a mouthful of dyed water instead. It wasn't dangerous or harmful, but it would definitely send a message. Mark raised an eyebrow when he saw what I was doing. "You're really going through with this?" he asked, half amused, half concerned. "She needs to learn a lesson," I replied firmly. "Besides, I'm not doing anything wrong. This is self-defense." That night, we waited together, taking turns peeking out the window. Hours passed, and just as I started to wonder if Karen had caught on to my setup, she appeared. She moved cautiously, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. When she finally knelt beside the truck and inserted the hose, I held my breath. Moments later, she recoiled sharply, dropping the hose as colored liquid sprayed everywhere. She stumbled backward, her hands flailing as she tried to wipe the mess off her clothes. Mark stifled a laugh beside me. "Well," he said, grinning, "that's one way to teach someone a lesson." But even as I felt a surge of satisfaction, I couldn't shake the bigger question. Why had Karen targeted me in the first place? Was this personal, or was there something deeper driving her actions? And now that I'd set a trap, how far would she go to retaliate? The moment Karen realized she'd been caught in my trap, her face twisted into an expression of pure shock, and then fury. She stumbled backward, wiping her hands frantically on her jeans, but the bright pink water had already soaked through her sleeves and splattered across her shoes. For a second, she froze, staring at the mess like it was some alien substance invading her perfectly ordered world. Then, with one last glance toward my house, she bolted back across the street, disappearing into the shadows. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. After weeks of wondering why my gas tank kept mysteriously emptying, I finally had answers. And now so did Karen. She knew someone was onto her. But as Mark and I stood there watching from behind the curtains, his grin fading into something closer to concern, I started to wonder if I'd made things worse instead of better. "Do you think she'll figure out it was us?" Mark asked quietly, his voice tinged with unease. "She's not stupid," I replied, crossing my arms tightly over my chest. "She probably already knows." That thought sent a chill down my spine. If Karen suspected I'd set a trap for her, what would she do next? Would she admit what she'd done, or double down and find another way to retaliate? Knowing her, I doubted she'd just let this slide. Karen thrived on control, on making sure everyone followed the rules her way. Getting caught stealing gas from my truck wasn't going to sit well with her pride. The next morning, I woke up early, half expecting to see some kind of retaliation waiting for me outside. Maybe a nasty note taped to my door, or a fresh complaint filed with the HOA. But when I peeked out the window, everything seemed normal. My truck sat undisturbed in the driveway, and Karen's house looked as pristine as ever. Too pristine, actually. The curtains were drawn tight, and her car wasn't in the driveway. It was almost as if she was avoiding being seen. For the rest of the day, I kept busy around the house, trying to distract myself from the nagging feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. Every time I heard a car drive by or footsteps on the sidewalk, I found myself glancing out the window, half convinced Karen was plotting her next move. By evening, though, nothing had happened. No angry confrontations, no anonymous letters slipped under the door. Just silence. But silence can be deceiving. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed the events of the past few days in my mind. Why had Karen targeted me specifically? Was it really about teaching me a lesson for standing up to the HOA, or was there more to it? And how far would she go to protect her reputation now that I'd exposed her secret? As much as I wanted to believe the situation was resolved, I couldn't shake the sense that this was only the beginning. Karen didn't strike me as the type to give up easily. If anything, she used this as fuel to escalate things further. The question was, when would she make her move, and what exactly would it be? By the time sleep finally came, my mind was racing with possibilities. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear: Karen wasn't done with me yet, and neither was I with her. The moment Karen realized she'd been caught in my trap, her face twisted into an expression of pure shock, and then fury. She stumbled backward, wiping her hands frantically on her jeans, but the bright pink water had already soaked through her sleeves and splattered across her shoes. For a second, she froze, staring at the mess like it was some alien substance invading her perfectly ordered world. Then, with one last glance toward my house, she bolted back across the street, disappearing into the shadows. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. After weeks of wondering why my gas tank kept mysteriously emptying, I finally had answers. And now, so did Karen. She knew someone was onto her. But as Mark and I stood there watching from behind the curtains, his grin fading into something closer to concern, I started to wonder if I'd made things worse instead of better. "Do you think she'll figure out it was us?" Mark asked quietly, his voice tinged with unease. "She's not stupid," I replied, crossing my arms tightly over my chest. "She probably already knows." That thought sent a chill down my spine. If Karen suspected I'd set a trap for her, what would she do next? Would she admit what she'd done, or double down, and find another way to retaliate? Knowing her, I doubted she'd just let this slide. Karen thrived on control, on making sure everyone followed the rules her way. Getting caught stealing gas from my truck wasn't going to sit well with her pride. The next morning, I woke up early, half expecting to see some kind of retaliation waiting for me outside. Maybe a nasty note taped to my door, or a fresh complaint filed with the HOA. But when I peeked out the window, everything seemed normal. My truck sat undisturbed in the driveway, and Karen's house looked as pristine as ever. Too pristine, actually. The curtains were drawn tight, and her car wasn't in the driveway. It was almost as if she was avoiding being seen. For the rest of the day, I kept busy around the house, trying to distract myself from the nagging feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. Every time I heard a car drive by or footsteps on the sidewalk, I found myself glancing out the window, half convinced Karen was plotting her next move. By evening, though, nothing had happened. No angry confrontations, no anonymous letters slipped under the door. Just silence. But silence can be deceiving. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed the events of the past few days in my mind. Why had Karen targeted me specifically? Was it really about teaching me a lesson for standing up to the HOA, or was there more to it? And how far would she go to protect her reputation now that I'd exposed her secret? As much as I wanted to believe the situation was resolved, I couldn't shake the sense that this was only the beginning. Karen didn't strike me as the type to give up easily. If anything, she'd use this as fuel to escalate things further. The question was, when would she make her move, and what exactly would it be? By the time sleep finally came, my mind was racing with possibilities. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear: Karen wasn't done with me yet, and neither was I with her. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. The confrontation with the neighbors replayed in my mind like a broken record, each word cutting deeper than the last. How could they take Karen's side without even hearing my version of the story? Didn't they see how manipulative she was? Or had she already poisoned their opinions so thoroughly that there was no room for doubt? I decided I couldn't let her get away with it. If Karen wanted to play dirty, fine, I'd fight back. But this time, I needed proof. Solid, undeniable evidence that would expose her for who she really was. That afternoon, I went online and ordered a small surveillance camera disguised as a rock. It wasn't expensive or fancy, but it would do the job. While waiting for it to arrive, I kept an eye on Karen's house from behind our curtains. Sure enough, her car eventually reappeared in the driveway, and she started coming outside again, though always when she thought no one was watching. She'd water her plants, check her mailbox, and occasionally glance toward my house with a smug expression that made my blood boil. When the camera finally arrived, I waited until dark to set it up. Mark helped me position it near my truck, angled just right to capture anyone approaching the vehicle. "This is going to work," he said confidently as we tested the live feed on my phone. Seeing the grainy black and white footage gave me a strange sense of relief. For once, I felt like I had the upper hand. But Karen wasn't idle either. Over the next few days, subtle signs of her influence began popping up around the neighborhood. A new flyer appeared taped to everyone's mailbox, reminding residents about community harmony and encouraging them to report any suspicious behavior to the HOA board. Suspicious behavior. That was clearly aimed at me. Then came the anonymous notes slipped under our door, politely suggesting we reconsider certain choices, like the marigolds I'd planted or the color of our front door. Each note chipped away at my patience, but I refused to give in. Instead, I focused on the camera feed, checking it obsessively throughout the day. At first, nothing happened. Days passed, and the footage showed only squirrels darting across the driveway and the occasional delivery driver dropping off packages. Just as I started to wonder if Karen had given up entirely, something changed. Late one night, as I lay in bed scrolling through social media, my phone buzzed with an alert from the camera app. My heart skipped a beat as I opened the notification and saw movement near my truck. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. Holding my breath, I tapped the video feed. There she was, Karen, creeping out of the shadows like a ghost. This time, she wasn't alone. Behind her lurked another figure, someone I recognized immediately. Mr. Peterson, the treasurer of the HOA. They whispered to each other before crouching beside my truck, inspecting the gas tank. Whatever they were planning, it was clear they weren't here to apologize. For a moment, I felt paralyzed. What were they doing? And why involve Mr. Peterson? But then anger surged through me, replacing fear with determination. I grabbed my phone and hit record, saving every second of the footage. Finally, I had proof, not just of Karen's actions, but of her willingness to drag others into her schemes. As I watched them fumble with tools near the gas tank, I realized something else. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. Karen was trying to isolate me, to make me look like the problem so she could maintain control over the neighborhood. But now, thanks to that little camera, I had the power to turn the tables. And I wasn't going to waste it. By the time I finished watching the footage from the camera, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a mix of adrenaline and anger. The video didn't just show Karen snooping around my truck. It showed her working with Mr. Peterson, one of the most trusted members of the HOA board. Together, they looked like co-conspirators, whispering and gesturing toward my property as if plotting something sinister. Whatever their plan was, it was clear this wasn't just about gas anymore. This was personal. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with the HOA board. Technically, only members could request such meetings, but Mark reminded me that we were dues-paying residents, and therefore entitled to raise concerns. When I sent the email requesting the meeting, I made sure to keep my tone professional and calm, though inside I was anything but. I attached a brief note saying the issue involved neighborhood safety and requested that all board members attend. Within hours, I received confirmation. The meeting was scheduled for that evening at the community center. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting time, I rehearsed what I would say in my head. I knew I had to tread carefully, Karen and Mr. Peterson weren't going to admit to anything unless I forced their hand. But I also knew I couldn't afford to let them twist the narrative again. This time, I needed to be smarter, sharper. When Mark and I arrived at the community center, the room was already filling up. Most of the neighbors were there, along with the entire HOA board, including Karen and Mr. Peterson. They sat side by side at the front table, exchanging smug glances that made my skin crawl. As I took my seat, I noticed several people glaring at me, their expressions cold and judgmental. Clearly, word had spread about my disruptive behavior. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood up and faced the room. My voice shook slightly at first, but I steadied myself by focusing on the facts. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I'm here because I believe there's been a serious breach of trust within our neighborhood, one that affects us all." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in before continuing. "Over the past few weeks, someone has repeatedly tampered with my property. At first, I thought it might have been a misunderstanding or an isolated incident. But thanks to some recent evidence, I now know it's part of a deliberate pattern." With that, I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projector screen set up in the room. The grainy black and white footage flickered to life, showing Karen and Mr. Peterson crouched beside my truck late at night. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as everyone watched the video. Some gasped audibly. Others leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Karen's face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "This isn't speculation," I said firmly, turning back to face the room. "This is proof. And I want to ask the board, how does this kind of behavior align with the values of our community? How can we trust leaders who act this way?" For a moment, the room fell silent. Then, chaos erupted. Neighbors began shouting questions, pointing fingers, and demanding explanations. Karen tried to defend herself, stammering something about miscommunication, but no one was buying it. Even Mrs. Hargrove, usually so quick to side with Karen, looked shocked and disappointed. By the end of the meeting, the board had no choice but to launch an investigation into Karen and Mr. Peterson's actions. For the first time since moving to Evergreen Lane, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to reclaim my peace. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The days following the meeting were a whirlwind of tension and uncertainty. The HOA board announced they would conduct a formal investigation into Karen and Mr. Peterson's actions, but I knew better than to expect immediate justice. Investigations took time. And in the meantime, the neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. Some neighbors avoided me altogether, while others gave me sympathetic smiles or whispered apologies for doubting me. It was clear that the video had shaken their trust in Karen, but old habits die hard, especially when it came to her influence. Karen, on the other hand, wasn't taking any of this lying down. She stopped pretending to be invisible and instead went on the offensive. Every day brought a new tactic. Anonymous emails accusing me of spying on innocent neighbors, flyers posted around the community center questioning the legitimacy of my evidence, even rumors spread at the local grocery store about how I'd allegedly doctored the footage. At first, her efforts unnerved me. But after a while, they started to feel desperate, like the flailing of someone who knew she was losing control. One evening, as Mark and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I noticed Karen pacing in her driveway. Her movements were erratic, almost frantic, as if she couldn't decide what to do next. For a moment, I felt sorry for her. As much as she infuriated me, I realized she was trapped in her own web of rules and manipulation, a prisoner of the very perfection she tried so hard to enforce. Still, sympathy didn't mean letting her off the hook. What she'd done wasn't just wrong. It was toxic, and I wasn't going to let her drag anyone else into her mess. The breaking point came a week later, during another HOA meeting. This time, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Neighbors packed the room, eager to hear the results of the investigation. When Mrs. Hargrove finally stood up to speak, her voice wavered slightly, an unusual sign of vulnerability from someone who usually exuded authority. After reviewing the evidence, she began, glancing nervously at Karen and Mr. Peterson. The board has reached a decision. Due to repeated violations of community guidelines and unbecoming conduct, both Karen and Mr. Peterson will step down from their positions on the board effective immediately. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Karen shot to her feet, her face flushed with rage. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're all making a huge mistake. She set us up." But her words fell flat. No one was listening. Not even Mr. Peterson, who sat slumped in his chair, staring at the floor. As the meeting adjourned, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over me. Justice had been served, but it hadn't come without cost. The past few weeks had tested my patience, my resolve, and my faith in the people around me. Yet, as I walked home that night, I noticed something different about Evergreen Lane. The air seemed lighter, less suffocating. Neighbors lingered outside, chatting and laughing for the first time in months. Even the flowers in my garden seemed brighter, as if they too could breathe easier now. Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could get. Karen kept to herself, rarely venturing outside except to tend to her immaculate lawn. Eventually, she put her house up for sale and moved away, leaving behind only whispers of her reign. Without her constant oversight, the neighborhood began to loosen up. People painted their doors bold colors, planted whatever flowers they liked, and left holiday decorations up well past deadlines. And you know what? Nothing bad happened. Looking back, I realized that Karen's downfall wasn't just about exposing her lies. It was about reclaiming our freedom. Freedom to make mistakes, to express ourselves, and to live without fear of judgment. Evergreen Lane wasn't perfect anymore. But maybe that was the point. Perfection is overrated. Sometimes, all it takes is one person standing up to remind everyone else that they deserve better.